What's going on? Can you be fat and healthy? It's a very interesting question, actually, that I would like to elaborate on a little bit here. According to the modern viewpoint, being fat is very unhealthy, actually. It elevates your risk for modern degenerative diseases as diabetes, heart disease, atherosclerosis, and all the associated things like, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, cancer, and generally increased mortality. So, if you go to the doctor, to your friend, he's of course going to tell you that being fat is very unhealthy and that pretty much everything in your life is going to improve if you lose some weight. So, however, we all know, or we all already have heard that this is only the very modern viewpoint, right? Which exists only for like about maybe 100 years or so. And this is perpetuated by very modern industries and institutions like, the whole fashion and modeling industry, for example, pharmaceutics and modern medicine. Not too long ago, fat women were actually pretty prized and very competed for amongst men. And the reason is simply that they had greater chances of surviving procreation, which was and still is actually to some degree a very great risk for women who are not nourished appropriately. Today we've got our wonderful friend, modern medicine, of course, who helps out happily in case of precarious situations for the sole sake of profits, of course, which only perpetuates the degeneration of humanity to an astonishing degree, by the way, in the process, but that's for another subject, that's for another topic. So the question arises here, is it actually unhealthy to be fat in modern times? Why did that perception change? And was it really healthy to be fat back then? And how, if that is the case, did the change come to be? The answer is yes, it is actually unhealthy to be fat in modern times. At least if you're not a very enlightened individual when it comes to nutrition, which is very unlikely at this point. And humans have actually very sharp instincts when it comes to health and procreation to ensure healthy offspring. So yes, the modern perception that being fat is somehow disgusting and therefore unhealthy is also correct. It is very unlikely that thousands of years of evolution brought up something incorrect, though. So we can assume that the former attitude that being fat is actually healthy was correct too. So this arises the question, when and why did being fat become unhealthy? The relatively simple answer lies in the introduction of vegetable oils. So when vegetable oils became introduced in the past century, in the 20th century, being fat or the health consequences of being fat dramatically changed. Previously to that era, so to say, we see people basically cooking everything in lard, I'm sure you have grandparents, great-grandparents or stuff like that who also back in the day were basically always cooking in lard, frying their stuff in old pig fat and all that kind of stuff, in butter or any other sort of animal fat. And the reason for that is that animal fats are actually a lot more stable when it comes to heat treatment compared to plant fats, because animal fats are much more saturated. The healthiness of unsaturated fats, which is propagated so much in modern times, is actually only to some degree healthy if these fats stay raw, because once you heat them and get some pressure on that stuff, it actually these unsaturated bonds are actually very unstable and they like to flip over very easily. So what happens then is that trans fats emerge out of these vegetable oils, or generally out of polyunsaturated fatty acids. It's true, we need that stuff, but we definitely don't need the rancid heated products that we see in basically any processed foods of the modern era, like all these crisps and chips and fries. And basically every time you eat a piece of meat in a restaurant or something, you have a very high chance that this got roasted or fried with the help of some sort of vegetable oils. So it is really hard to dodge this stuff nowadays. If you go to the supermarket and buy some sort of processed food, you can be damn sure that there's some sort of vegetable oil in there. And over time, more and more calories of this former lard and these former animal fats, which were much more stable, got exchanged to vegetable oils. And the reason for that is, of course, profits. It is much easier to create a lot of calories of vegetable oil compared to the same calories of some sort of animal fat. So what they did was they advertised these new vegetable oils very cleverly. They said, man, it's a new revolution. They are so much more healthy, much healthier than the old animal fats, with all these saturated fatty acids and all the cholesterol. So it's gonna clog your arteries and stuff like that. And it is debatable whether, it is healthy to heat animal fats, because heating anything to a frying temperature is probably not healthy. But the question really is, what is healthier? Frying these stable animal fats, which almost look the same, after they were fried compared to before they were fried, or, frying these vegetable oils, which contain a very high quantity of unsaturated fatty acids, which are not very stable, and all these molecules change if you put some pressure on it or cook them. There's actually the process of hardening margarine, for example, is simply heating and putting pressure on these fats. What's happening is that the unsaturated bonds flip over, the fatty acids become, really strange, almost plasticky in their consistence, and they stick together, they stick to each other very nicely in that configuration, and that's why this margarine is now hardened. So basically, it's just simply hardened vegetable oils. Now, so when we have a very high intake of that stuff, we already know that the consistency of our subcutaneous fatty tissue pretty much depends very, very directly on what you eat. Actually, we know this from pigs. There are these pigs in the Spanish area. These I forgot the name already, but they are basically roaming around in these forests and only eat nuts all day. And this is why the bacon of these pigs is very prized, because they incorporate all these fatty acids from the nuts, and then they have a very high omega-3 fatty acid content, and all this kind of stuff. And the subcutaneous fat of humans works just in the same way as these pigs do. If we eat something, we incorporate it very directly into our subcutaneous fat. We don't really change that stuff chemically a lot, at least. So you eat a lot of vegetable oils, then your subcutaneous fat is going to contain a lot of vegetable oils. You eat a lot of, heated animal fats, then your subcutaneous fat contains a lot of heated animal fats. You eat a lot of raw animal fats, your subcutaneous fat contains a lot of raw animal fats. Now the question is, what is the healthiest state? What is the healthiest fat to have, in your subcutaneous fatty tissue and generally amongst your body? We see, for example, that fatty tissues like the brain and nervous system contain a higher content of omega-3 fatty acids. So you need that stuff there. We see that subcutaneous fat contains a lot more, saturated fatty acids, which is probably, the purpose of that tissue, to serve as a simple energy storage for later, for times of famine, for times of fasting. And then we also have the bone marrow, which is also containing a lot of saturated fatty acids, actually. So these are the main fat containers inside of a human body, so to say: the nervous tissue, the bone marrow, and the subcutaneous fatty acids. And what we can see from the outside is the subcutaneous fatty acids. So this is really what humans use to assess the health state of another individual for procreation or whatever. Now, what we see nowadays is that these subcutaneous fats, they are very squishy, very fluffy, very soft, and they very easily literally fall apart in this kind of cellulite-like fashion. We don't see these perky roundings, these perky, healthy roundings anymore. If you're a man, just simply think about what you would find attractive in a woman, and just if there is more fat on that woman, just simply think of more of that. This is how this actually should look like, And there is, of course, a genetic component to that. That is very true, but it is very true as well that you can directly influence the consistency of your subcutaneous fatty acids by modifying what you eat. And this has been demonstrated over and over again. So this is really interesting. I think that from a modern perspective, yes, being fat is unhealthy, but only because these people contain so much of these polyunsaturated fatty acids, which actually do not belong inside of a human body, And it really messes you up. It really messes you up in terms of subcutaneous fat. It messes you up in terms of looks. It messes you up in terms of, internal problems as well. We've got all these atherosclerosis and this stuff. It has a lot to do with that as well, These hydrogenated vegetable oils, they don't really know where to go in your body. Your body doesn't really know what to do with them. However, they are fats, so your body is still very likely to, to grab, to hold on to them, because this is, valuable, quote unquote, energy for your body. And it would be from an evolutionary point of view, it would be very stupid from your body to ditch that stuff, because who knows what you got access to in a few weeks. You might need that energy for fasting. So it is not that your body is so smart that it can detect, oh, this is bad fat, I don't want to take that up, and this is good fat, I just take that one up, So you really got to be selective there with what you put in your mouth, actually. So the takeaway message from this is, I guess, that you should stay away from processed foods, stay away from these oils in general. We didn't have vegetable oils previous to maybe 2,000 years ago or something. The first vegetable oil I think that was introduced was olive oil in the Mediterranean region. And this was not the kind of olive oil that we see today. This was essentially olive juice, okay? Olive juice with a lot of the floating byproducts still in there, not so highly refined as we see today, not so filtered. So this is something different there, Today everything is very filtered, very processed, very refined. Also heated in most cases, actually, and these oils they become rancid really, really fast as well, under the influence of oxygen. So really be careful with the stuff. It's probably not healthy, and it's definitely not necessary. If you have access to raw animal fats, these are probably still the healthiest fats that you can consume as a human being. And this is also what you produce in your body on your own. If you, for example, have only access to carbohydrates for a certain, time, and your body is forced to, synthesize certain animal fats by itself, inside of itself, then it's going to produce these saturated fatty acids, these animal fats. So it's really resembling what you would produce anyway, So this is something that tells you, okay, if I eat that stuff and incorporate that stuff, it is probably not going to be detrimental for my health. And another thing that I find interesting is that when you ask women, for example, what they find attractive in men, then we see the same phenomenon. There's actually very few women who find the modern, shredded, trained look very attractive, which is so perpetuated by the modern fitness industry, they also would like to have a more juicier look, so to say, in their man. But yeah, again, the question is, what is the consistency? What is the composition of that subcutaneous fat, in these modern men, which also eat a lot of hydrogenated vegetable oils. I can add that body fat in general has a lot more purposes actually than just serving as a energy storage. With the subcutaneous fat, for example, we also see that it has a lot to do with protecting your body from impacts, just as well as protecting your body from the extreme cold of a very cold climate, for example, just as well as protecting your body from extreme heat as well, actually. And it also serves as a substrate, as a starting substrate for a lot of substances in the body, many hormones, for example. And we also see that it is very important to have fat to simply lubricate your body. Lubrification has a lot to do with being supplied, being sustained with healthy fats, essentially. So we see that if this basic substrate of your body is infiltrated, so to say, by unhealthy substances like these vegetable oils, we don't really know how this this cascade, this chemical cascade in your body affects then also different outcomes like your hormones, the functionality of your body in general, the mobility of your body, your range of motion, if the lubrication of your joints doesn't work that ideally anymore, and all this kind of stuff, And I also might add that the ideal, body composition of a human individual also probably depends greatly on the race of that individual, on the geographical heredity that this individual carries, depending on where it lives. I'm pretty sure that a native African, the ideal fat percentage of a native African is somewhat different to the ideal fat percentage of a native Asian, compared to a native European, compared to a native North and South American. These things are different. There's a reason why we as human beings are different in that regard, because we have adaptations to different geographical entities. And this is, of course, something that needs to be respected. And usually all these tribes, these wild living people, quote unquote, they have their sources of raw animal fats, their specific sources of raw animal fats that they eat quite frequently to ensure optimal body function. So yeah, go for raw animal fats if you want to become fat in a healthy way, so to say. And I also want to point out that a couple of years ago, hundreds of years ago, it was not even possible to become fat in a unhealthy way, because these vegetable oils did not exist in such a high quantity as they do today. And this, of course, has a lot to do with this attitude that being fat is actually healthy, because if you could manage to get fat back then, this would mean that you had access to a lot of, animal foods, a lot of animal fats, a lot of calories from these food sources. And this is also, of course, a sign of prosperity and a sign of richness. Only the highest class of humans could afford that back then. So it was only natural to see that as healthy and as good, essentially, and as something that is worth striving towards. Nowadays, that everybody is fat and everybody's fat in a unhealthy way, it is only natural to see it as disgusting and unhealthy, which it is. That's pretty much it. Bye.